All right, good evening, Dr. Longmire and anyone else. I have the privilege of sharing this presentation with tonight. My name is Riley Hamilton, and I am going to show you everything that I have learned in this course in a nutshell. I'm really fortunate to be a part of the Master's in Curriculum of Instruction program at Eastern Washington University. And as I get towards the end of my time, it's really cool to take some of these more higher level courses and kind of see how it encapsulates everything that I have learned so far. And for someone like me who was a little bit intimidated by the title, Advanced Reading Methods, as someone myself who has struggled with reading, maybe has not spent a lot of time, the necessary time that I should, teaching my students how to become better readers, I could say that I have now come to a place where I definitely see the importance of why we need to all play our part in helping establish the content area literacy as a part of our classroom. We need to make sure that we are all on the same page. And while we might not all be reading teachers, we certainly all play a role in making sure that our students have ample opportunity to practice the skills so that they can thrive in all of our classrooms. So, the purpose of this assignment was to summarize really some of the key takeaways that I have been fortunate enough to learn about in this course, and what am I going to do with it? Now that I know all of these things that I know, I now have a job. I have to make sure that I don't just let this be something that I learned, 15, 20 years ago as I, progress into my career. I need to do something about it, and I do have plans to, which I am very, very happy to share. As far as kind of the picture that we've got going on here, and I thought it related to reading in the sense of we are currently in the midst of a giant transition to where, we are going from having primarily used print media. We are now kind of transitioned to the sense of where e-media is becoming very, very popular. So I did not want to neglect that, and I kind of want to talk about that as well, just a little bit here to start, to where this is important because our kids are, whether or not we think it, they are being exposed to media more and more and more every single year. And if we think about just books right off the bat, you might think, well, I mean, maybe we aren't reading so many books anymore, but that does not mean that they are not being exposed to media, that they need to know and have that literacy abilities to be able to comprehend and analyze and use in academic and personal contexts. So here we are. Let's go ahead and let's head into our first section. To start, we're going to go ahead and do a brief material review of everything that I feel was a key takeaway for me in my time spent in Education 544 as a student. I'm really fortunate that I had a chance to take this course. The first thing we are going to talk about is content area literacy. Now, at first, I was really intimidated by this definition and kind of a lot of the definitions that were in the first modules that we had learned about, and particularly the difference between something like content area literacy, disciplinary literacy. But to start, at the very, very base, we need to establish what content area literacy is and why it is important. So content area literacy, and this is just kind of a definition that I have formed just based off some scholars that had done some work. These are the common skill sets that are used by learners as they comprehend content in every single classroom and across all of these subjects. These are skills that you would use in a math class as much as you would use in a history class, as much as you would use in a culinary class. At first, I really struggled to kind of see how these were all interconnected, but they are. And kind of going to a notion of we all play a part in making sure our students are developing these skills because they are applicable in every single classroom. And examples of these skills are asking questions, segmenting words, having the ability to annotate texts, determine cause and effect. These are skills that you need to have in every single academic context. Now, as we kind of go back to that term of disciplinary literacy, that is more along the lines of thinking like and acting like an actual historian would, where you are, critically analyzing materials and asking questions as a historian would. Or in the context of culinary, which I'm a little bit more familiar with, thinking and acting like a chef and writing like a chef would. That is the key difference there. Content area literacy, kind of the skills that bridge into the disciplines, and they're cross applicable. Whereas disciplinary literacy, you would not think and act like a doctor if you are fulfilling the role of a historian. So in that sense, I now know my role. That is something that became apparent to me, and why I feel like I'm a better teacher having taken this course. Is that I know now that I have a purpose, and beyond teaching students how to be better cooks, because everybody cooks at the end of the day. Maybe I didn't see myself before as a content area literacy teacher, but I now know that I play a role in then making sure my students get ample opportunities to practice these skills, as they are going to be essential in their careers in education. As far as how do the content area literacy skills connect to the Common Core state standards, that's kind of our little acronym we love, acronyms in education, CCSS. They are deeply embedded in the Common Core state standards, which we will be discussing right now. So here we see a map of all the states that have adopted the Common Core state standards, which were implemented and finalized in 2010 on behalf of the Council of Chief State School Officers and National Governors Association. Now, there's a lot of ideas about what these standards actually entail, but to kind of summarize them, it is essentially a framework of benchmarks, learning benchmarks that students ideally would meet by the time that they get into and pass the grades that are outlined. And these are K through 12 standards. Now, some states do adhere to these standards and kind of have them as a part of their, like in Washington, we have like our state 8, like our learning outcomes. We use these standards to help us meet these state learning standards, because of course the Common Core national standards, the idea is it is like a national implementation. Whereas states like Texas, Oklahoma, Nebraska, just to name a few on the map here, they actually have come up with their own standards. But we are starting to see now more than ever why these standards might be important. And moving forward from there, I will say at the beginning of the course, I was a little bit confused about how these standards came to be. I've heard a lot of stories. I've heard that they did include educators, that they did, take in opinions, but then I've also heard on the flip side that they were maybe established for other reasons. So I do remain a little bit unclear on kind of like the motive for creating these standards, and I don't really have a opinion. What I do know is that I myself have benefited from really looking into them. As somebody who doesn't spend a lot of time looking at them traditionally, I am more accustomed to working with family consumer sciences national standards, 21st century leadership skills, like in career and technical education. It's very interesting to kind of see what benchmarks that I should be expecting from my students, and therefore kind of creating opportunities for them to meet those benchmarks in my classroom. So, nevertheless, they are important to consider and to think about, because they weren't created for nothing. Another important concept in this class that was really fun to look into was the idea of a pedagogical knowledge and framework. I say that 20 times fast. As somebody who pursued education from the time that I got into my undergraduate studies, I will say that it was hard for me for a while to kind of define what pedagogy was. If you go on YouTube right now and you look up what is pedagogy, you'll get a million videos. Not kidding, like literally like a million videos. And I recall being in my undergraduate studies and having to write some piece on pedagogy. And I watched the video, and it was the most confusing thing I've ever watched in my life. And even the comments in the video were like, this is not what pedagogy is. So I've kind of struggled to really like identify what it is. But here's my key takeaway after everything that I learned about in this course. It's kind of a definition that I used based on supplemental material, and I kind of threw it together. And that is pedagogical knowledge and framework. It is the intentional, multifaceted, and systematic methods of instruction that we use as teachers and educators to make sure that our students are actually accomplishing the goals that we have for them in mind when we are planning out our instruction and devising our curriculum. These are some important factors that I believe play into it, and this is a knowledge that I attained after reading the work on behalf of the Department of Education for Children and Young People as part of developing pedagogical knowledge and a framework that you will adhere to. You need to be considering enabling learning, making sure first and foremost that your students are actually able to learn and do the things that you are trying to get them to do. And enabling these learning experiences foremost starts with getting to know your kids. You cannot just come in and think that you're going to get everything done if you don't know who you're working with. So you need to get to know their kiddos. They're pretty awesome. Another key part of this is modeling expectations and setting the expectations that your students can actually meet. Then that would inevitably lead you into the actual second part of pedagogy, which is planning for learning. What exactly are you going to be doing to have your students take away what you want them to take away? And this comes with guided practice, which will eventually scaffold independent practice. The idea is moving from an I do to a we do to a you do model in your own classroom. Over here in figure 1.1, we see an example of a pedagogical framework, and to kind of just articulate what is going on here, we can see experiential learning, differentiated learning, integrated learning, all working together. And within that, we see collaborative, values-driven, ICT enabled. And the idea is that all of these things have to work together. So again, kind of going back to the multifaceted, systematic approach to teaching and learning. All these things have to work together for St. Hilda's Primary School pedagogical framework. They all need to work in coincidence to accomplish the goals that they might have. And these can be explicit, they can be implicit, but generally they are listed in the school's mission statements and whatnot. But important things to know. Here is where I started realizing, wow, English teachers and anyone who spends time teaching this sort of thing on a regular basis, which will be myself now that I am aware, this stuff was pretty tricky. This was hard for me to understand. So bear with me, and if you are like, dude, that is not what you should have taken away, feel free, leave a comment, and give me some feedback. But the reading fluency strategies that stood out to me in as I started looking into them was teacher modeling, promoting reading, and peer group reading. These strategies are something that we have to embody as teachers. And when we are trying to get our students to be better readers, we need to focus on the fact that reading fluency is a lot more than just reading fast. Now, as somebody who doesn't spend a lot of time teaching this sort of thing, or was maybe intimidated by it, I would just kind of assume naively that fluency directly relates with speed. And as that is a part of reading fluency, you definitely will eventually get faster and faster at reading. It does not always have to do with speed. And we'll kind of see what that looks like in the case study portion of this presentation. And when we get there, we will kind of revisit the idea of what it looks like to be a good teacher model, how to actually get students invested in reading, and why they might want to do so. Because as they become fluent readers, this is going to greatly reduce the cognitive strain that they are experiencing. They're going to have to use way less effort, and eventually reading will become something that's natural. One thing that's key and not explicitly listed on this slide is that reading is something you have to practice, though. It is kind of a use it or lose it. So we need to make sure that we are actually doing it in our classroom. As far as what all the reading entails, I was fortunate enough to learn this semester about the 5 pillars of reading, or the 5 components of reading. And the 5 components are as follows. We have phonics, which is the ability to comprehend differences amongst sounds and letters. A key difference between phonics and our next pillar of phonemic awareness is that while phonics considers sounds and letters, phonemic awareness is more concerned with words and sounds. So we have a difference there, words and sounds. But the idea for phonemic awareness is that phonemes, or the basic units of words, can be rearranged to create new words that maybe have different meanings. And phonics, phonemic awareness, they do connect with other components of reading that are also important, which is phonological awareness. Now, that is just the very, very basic recognition that different letters have different sounds. like very, very basic, at the very basic level. Not that, like, we're not getting as deep as we would to into phonics, where we are actually examining like connections and differences. It's just like, oh, when you hear hat, it's a h sound, versus when you hear bat, it's a b sound. Like being able to recognize the very, very simple differences between a b and a hat sound. Another pillar would be reading fluency. Now, kind of going back to that previous slide, this has a lot more to do with accuracy, prosody, which is a really nice word that I was able to learn, and kind of a nice new like buzzword for me to use and consider as part of what it means to be a fluent reader. So not only are we trying to examine how accurately our students are reading it, what is the rhythm or the prosody or the emotion that our students are attaching? Are they reading it in a way that makes sense? So are they, developing the ideal rhythm and emotion that would be associated with whatever text that they are reading? Whether it is an informative text or a narrative, are they able to, integrate that feature of prosody? And comprehension, that's a key one there. Can they actually remember what it is that they are reading on the page? Maybe it's right after reading, maybe it is sometime later, but that is a key component of reading fluency. Can you actually remember what the heck is happening? And then eventually speed will come with all of those things. Not that speed is not important. There is something to be said about reading speed, words per minute, that sort of deal. But that comes with establishing all the rest. How accurate can you actually read? Are you demonstrating the proper rhythm? Are you connecting emotion to it? Are you reading it as somebody would that wrote the text? And can you actually remember what happened? Another pillar of reading is vocabulary, and these are the context-specific words that we would use in our academic disciplines or just in any context. So as students build their vocabulary, this will also contribute to reading fluency as well. Then the last pillar, we have comprehension, which is the ultimate goal, to kind of paraphrase some of the work that we examined in this course. What is the point of reading if you cannot actually comprehend what is going on? So there does need to be some dedicated time to teaching our students how to do that. As far as how this information really changed me as a teacher, and it really goes back to me having very, very limited awareness of what all this entailed anyway, what it meant to be a good teacher to support our students in their reading. So now I know what to look for, and I know what to promote, and I know the different things that my students need to be, or should maybe, when examining like something like Common Core State Standards. What is a realistic expectation for what they can be accomplishing, and what should they be practicing? As far as how it's connected to the Common Core State Standards, it is deeply embedded, and we will see that towards the end of this presentation. There are different sections of the Common Core State Standards, and each of them does relate to the 5 pillars of reading that we see listed here below. Determining if our students can comprehend ideas, if they are establishing a broader vocabulary, and that sort of thing. So it is very, very deeply embedded, as is a lot that has to do with reading. Most of the Common Core standards are founded on principles of reading, which is actually pretty fascinating. Once more, revisiting the idea of pedagogy, it was really, really cool as somebody who's, still a newer teacher, to kind of see how my style matches with some of the ideas that have been proposed in academia. And there were 5 pedagogical approaches that have been kind of widely recognized as the main drivers of teaching, which is like what we would use on, if you were to walk into a classroom, you could probably see a teacher using one of these pedagogical approaches. So again, kind of like the systems that we are using to promote teaching. And in order, we have reflective, inquiry-based, integrative, collaborative, and constructivism. One thing that I took away from this course that really relates to the idea of educational philosophy was that over time, I would guess that maybe we would see more constructivism in a certain era of education versus the previous era of education, which was a lot more like when we're talking perennialism and essentialism. Like, here's what kids need to know, versus now we're in a whole different realm where it is almost how are students creating knowledge for themselves, versus this is what you need to know, here's everything that's important, here's what you need to think about. Now we are kind of seeing how the pendulum swings just a little bit. But that's something you would maybe have to have a little bit of knowledge of how educational philosophy has changed in the United States, and just globally to kind of have that perspective. But that's one thing that I definitely noticed. To kind of go through them pretty quickly, first and foremost, we have the reflective pedagogy. Now, this is critical for both teachers and students to really be assessing what are my strengths, what are my weaknesses, and it goes beyond the academic context. This extends into our personal lives as well. So, because what you are good at and not get at outside of school, and what you are struggling with and excelling in, is going to directly impact how you learn. Because at the end of the day, you are an individual. Inquiry based pedagogy is mostly concerned with getting students oriented to actually critically thinking like somebody would in the field. And this starts with giving them something like a project, or something like an end goal that they are pursuing that is based in inquiry. So, asking questions, having them try to solve a goal, or a problem with. The project based approach in mind. So this invites a lot of collaboration, which is really essential for our classrooms, and again kind of relates to constructivism and the other collaborative pedagogy, which we will see and talk about in just a second. Integrative. The idea in this one is that connections are established amongst the disciplines in a specific context. So that was just a really wordy way to say that in culinary arts, we need to have we need to make sure that our students are fluent in mathematics, because you are having to use math to add up quantities of ingredients and scaling and measurement. Reading skills come into play here because you're needing to learn how to read and analyze a recipe. History comes into play as you kind of learn about, historically how things were established, like in the kitchen brigade system, Scoffier's kitchen brigade. All as somebody who really is trying to focus on this integrative pedagogy, I would make it a mission to make sure my students know, hey, look, here's how culinary incorporates math, science, history, reading, writing, all of the various disciplines as much as possible, to kind of show kids of like, hey, this is why this matters. Like, this is why you need to learn how to do this. Yeah, everyone cooks, but look how integrated this is in everything else, and look how this brings everything together. Collaborative pedagogy, putting our students in the forefront of social learning experiences. I feel like this is something that I've excelled at as a teacher. Just because of the way my classroom is designed. I'm not saying I'm an excellent teacher by any stretch of the imagination, but in culinary, I mean, you have to work together. You have to work in teams. You really, really have to be making sure that that is dialed in, and that there are systems in place for your students to succeed in that environment. So I would say that that's the one that I excel at, because I just have the most experience with it. So that being said, that kind of brings us to constructivism, where, again, kind of to revisit that idea of like education is not just something that happens to students. This is something that students are desperately needing to construct their own knowledge. Like, we can't just like dump the information onto them. It's up to them to do something with it, which is a relatively new idea, shocking enough, in the, when considering the history of education. And when we kind of revisit again the ideas of like essentialism and perennialism of like, here's what kids need to know, now it's like, no, we can take a little bit of look of like, how are they using it to benefit themselves, and what exactly are they going to do with the knowledge that they created. So pretty cool stuff. I believe this is our last kind of portion before we jump into the case study, and that has to do with authentic tasks and content literacy. Because there is a difference between having students focusing on academic tasks versus giving them tasks that do replicate what they might be expected to do outside the confines of the school. So what exactly is an authentic task in content literacy? That is kind of defined as the activities that would replicate exactly what a student would be doing in the workplace. And so examples of that would be doing, instead of in a culinary course, having my students, spend an abundant amount of time taking notes when we're learning about food safety and sanitation. I would maybe set up workstations to where they have to identify hazards that might be in place. I would put them in the position to see what it's like to be a Department of Health worker, or somebody who's having to come through and give permits for us to be able to cook, and kind of have them see where food safety comes into play. Now, I do feel like these authentic tasks are not something that you can just start with. There definitely is something to be said about having students take notes and have some of that base knowledge. I'm not against that in any regard. But eventually, you do want to spend a lot of time as a teacher leading your students towards tasks that will give them legitimate insight into what it's like to, fulfill these roles. The textbook and that I was able to read a snippet out of on behalf of Parsons and Ward listed the example of like if a student was in social studies class and all they did in that class was take notes, they might learn that that's what social studies is just like looking and taking notes on the past of whatnot and history, and that's all you do. Students are going to learn what the lesson leads them to do. So how are we making our lessons lead them to doing things that they would actually maybe do in those contexts? Pretty cool idea here. And that really made me realize of like, wow, okay, so are my students thinking and acting in the way that I want them to, or are we maybe spending a little bit too much time, like in the example of food safety and sanitation, focusing on just the content versus like, hey, here's why this matters. I could tell you all day long about, food safety and sanitation. Here's what you need to remember, and critical control points, and this and that, cross contamination. But here's what it looks like, and here's why it matters. How does it connect to the Common Core state standards? We'll talk a little bit about that in a future slide, but pretty much the connection there is in the idea that we as teachers are trying to get our students to reach benchmarks, and they're more likely to reach benchmarks if they are doing something that is actually inviting motivation and student engagement. And without it, we are just going like as far as the Common Core state standards go, we can't just have our students focus on that specific skill. We actually need to engage them in activities that skill will develop as a part of being in that activity, like if that hopefully makes sense. And we'll kind of revisit that a little bit later. So I'm not done talking about Common Core state standards. Okay, moving on to the second portion of this presentation. We had to pick a case study that resonated with us and kind of come up with a evidence-based solution to helping this student. Now, I did my best as somebody who has not spent a lot of time working with elementary age students, but one that resonated with in particular was in the case of Yanni. So we'll read this out real quick. Yanni is a fifth grader with accurate and automatic decoding skills, but she does not read in phrasal units or pauses at appropriate punctuation points. She gets lost while reading and is focused on reading fast, but is unable to retell or summarize what she has read. When others are doing the reading, she struggles to engage in discussion or share meaningful insights, indicating that her listening comprehension is also a challenge. So, as far as some personal connections to that case, I don't know if you were listening to me read that, but I kind of was doing some of the same things that Yanni does. I catch myself doing that all the time when I'm reading. I maybe don't follow or adhere to punctuation as properly as I could. I'm not a strong reader. I never have been. I've really been somebody that, still to this day, somebody who's in a master's program, embarrassingly enough, I have to read a page 4 or 5 times, sometimes down to the sentence. I have to read a sentence, 4 or 5 times to be like, hey, did I get that? What? And historically, being in classes where we were asked to read and share out, I did not ever have much to say because I was like, man, I hope I really actually interpreted what was going on there. You know what? I actually don't remember what just happened at all. So that was just my, kind of personal connection with Yanni. I feel like this is common, and this is getting more and more common that in my classroom. I don't know why, so I'm not even going to sit here and tell you it has to do with, the technology advancements or anything like that, because I don't know. And at the end of the day, I really do not know, but I feel like it's pretty common that students, maybe you ask them to, read something. I feel like, especially in culinary, I ask them to kind of, read or, talk about what's on the recipe relates to what I did when I demoed it for them. And sometimes they really struggle. So that kind of gave me an idea of maybe this is something I should focus on. Not to mention my man right here. Wow, been there a lot. Been there a ton. If I were to consider intervening with Yanni, let's say that was my student, All of these strategies that I'm going to talk about here to promote reading fluency are evidence based, and they are all sourced from materials that I was able to learn about in my time in Education 544. First and foremost, kind of revisiting the idea of Yanni. She really wants to read fast. Well, it's not the goal, and if you are trying to read fast, you're kind of missing the point. So I would encourage Yanni first and foremost to try to read as well as she can, not to read as fast as she can, because speed will eventually come. That's going to come with time. That's something that comes with practice, and the other strategies that we're going to see here. When all of those are in place, speed will happen. And that leads us to the second thing that I would do to intervene, and that is, what does this kid like to do? Like, what is this kid interested in? Because Yanni's an individual. More so than she is a student. Like, she has a lot going on for her. So maybe I can kind of bridge the gap between some of these discrepancies and what she likes to do. So I would find some things that she's interested in, maybe try to get her into that material. And this was a really cool strategy that I liked, that I had never heard of, but I really wish I had an opportunity to maybe do this when I was younger. And I definitely am looking forward to having kids. And, if they're ever there where they're struggling like I was, this is something I would try. Have Yanni listen to an audiobook of a book she's interested in reading, and have her track while she's listening to the narrator, so then she can sit there and silently and hear how it is supposed to flow, and kind of compare that to maybe how she is thinking it should flow. Because I do the same thing, even just reading that little snippet for you. I have my idea of how it should flow. I wonder if I were to put that into text to speech, how it would spit it out. Sometimes it's a little robotic, but if I were to, the person who created that prompt, if they were to read it, how would they read it? What is the intention there? But these are 3 fluency interventions that I would do to help Yanni eventually develop speed, but really making sure that she can read accurately, kind of develop that prosody again, so that rhythm by listening to a narrator, especially the bonus points if it's the person who wrote the book narrating it. That would be awesome, and help her become a fluent reader. Some other strategies for intervention that have to do with before, during, and after. These were all, again, ones that I took away from this course. A before strategy that stood out to me, apologies, would be to model the task that I want Yanni to do. So again, kind of stepping in as a teacher and showing her, hey, here's how you do things. Here's how I would go about doing things, or here's how I would do it. That starts with before you even start reading, to kind of set them up for success in that sense. During reading, I really liked the idea of using a survey strategy. Now, that includes having students highlight parts of the document or the section of whatever they're reading. Now, this includes vocabulary, whatever they think the main idea is, maybe have them do the main characters, and a critical step at this point would be to define what is quote unquote critical vocabulary with that student while they are reading. So then they know what exactly it is that they're reading. And yes, you might have to pause for a second and kind of tell them what that means. But so they're not getting to that point being like, shoot, I don't know what that meant. Okay, what did that mean? And then they're lost. That's going to really affect fluency as well. Because if they get hung up on the fact they don't know what that means, I do that all the time. What that means, it's going to be hard on their fluency. After the fact, I thought this idea was really cool. So all you English teachers out there that do this, I love you. I think this is cool. Have Yanni act as a TV reporter and kind of breaking news, summarize what it is that she took away from that article. Or have her write a letter to somebody that's a family member, kind of take the stress out of it a little bit. You're not having to focus so much on doing it in front of a class. It's like, what would you tell your best friend about what you just read? Or what would you tell your dad about this that you wrote? Maybe kind of take the stress of it a little bit there. And it's just different context. Some people don't like public speaking. Some people are able to kind of articulate their words a little bit differently in a letter than they would in a group conversation. So something to keep in mind. Some things to help that kiddo gain some confidence. I liked the idea of pulling back the curtain. So showing Yanni, hey, here's how I would go about doing things. Or, hey, when I was, creating this lesson, here is what I had in mind for what I would want my students to do, and just really getting that, putting that out there for her to see. This goes alongside with incorporating meaningful practice opportunities. So again, it's kind of a use it or lose it skill. If your kids aren't reading, they're not going to take anything away from it, and they're not going to get better at it. So you need to make sure that they have meaningful practice. I would keep on pursuing what it is that she's interested in, and I would relentlessly try to find her things to read so that she is just naturally gravitated toward it. And at the end of the day, I tell my kids this all the time: nothing makes me happier than one of these right next to your name, a big old A, and me being your biggest fan. You just showing up here every day. So I would just do the best I could to just be the rock star cheerleader, and make her know that she is really appreciated. How would I track the progress? I liked the idea of using a modified status of the class chart, so kind of breaking it down in a chart form about, okay, what book is Yanni reading? Write the title down. How long is it taking? So what page are you on today, kiddo? You on page 37? Okay, we'll check in, a couple days from now. We'll see what page you're on. But here's where it's modified. Again, based off of the work of Bright, is I would have a section of like what your key takeaways are, because she really struggled at summarizing, even like text that she has just read. And she had a hard time of contributing to class conversations and would maybe listen so well or participate. I would have her write down what is something that you would contribute. And let's say I was lucky enough to be there with her when she had to speak up. I would maybe be like, hey, kiddo, differentiate a little bit. I'd have to be like, hey, you wrote it down, remember? Like, let's see, what would you contribute? As I naturally scaffold from like what she likes to read versus like, okay, here's what we're reading in class now. So now let's do the same thing. Let's kind of identify this and that, to kind of get her up and moving, with everybody else in the class. I like this idea because it helps me identify what exactly this kid actually likes to do, and helps me see kind of some strengths, weaknesses, where I can jump in as a teacher. As far as how reading fluency connects to Common Core, I feel like it directly relates. So Yanni was a fifth grade student, so I took a look at the fifth grade Common Core standards, and we can kind of think back about what exactly the case was of Yanni, and I feel like these sections highlighted really is where it is the clearest to me. So kind of going back and being able to use the survey method, Yanni would be determining the theme of a story, two or more main ideas. As we can see here in the middle, she would be able to find an idea, quote accurately from a text. So like pulling things of like what exactly is happening, drawing inferences. That's kind of what I'm going for there. And if we were to roll out the news reporter, I feel like this really connects well with having writing or leading informative sessions on what exactly you just learned, or writing down opinions. I believe that would maybe match just a little bit better. So if you were to kind of summarize everything you just read, like a news reporter, breaking news headlines, what do you think is the most important thing that you took away there? How would you convey that to people that were listening? And if you were to so let's go back to number 2. If you were to write a letter to your parents, like how would you exactly lay out everything that you just read? So definitely embedded in the Common Core state standards are the fluency intervention strategies that I came up with. But again, as somebody who doesn't spend a lot of time doing this, I would love to know, what would you do? How would you do this just a little bit better? Okay, so that is leading us now to the final segment of what we've got going on. I have a list of questions that I'm just going to kind of run through here as I come to a close. So I'm going to just take time to answer these genuinely. I have not put a ton of thought into what I'm going to say here, so this is going to be just a little bit more authentic than writing something down or putting it in the slides, so bear with me. So first question that we have here for us: what have you learned in your time during the course? Well, the thing that I learned right off the bat that really stands out to me, you can see my brain got so excited, I just wanted to jump in and talk about it before I even thought through my sentence. We are all responsible for this. I had naively assumed that I'm not a reading or writing teacher. I don't have much to tell you. I don't have much to share with you. But here I am as somebody who is now been informed. I know my job and I know what I am here to do. So I've learned that we all play a role in making sure that our students are developing content area literacy skills, that they have ample opportunity to read and to practice reading. And so I would say that these are what had stood out to me. in particular. I would say that the subject that I liked in this class the most was definitely the 5 pillars of reading. That was really cool to know of like what to focus on when kids are struggling, because that seems really, really intimidating when a kid does not know how to read. I would really struggle, but here I am. Now I know kind of what to look at. Okay, is it their phonemic awareness, phonological awareness, fluency? Like, what exactly am I working with? Um, Question number 2. How has your knowledge and understanding of reading fluency and the Common Core state standards changed since you have been in the course? Is there improvement? Do you feel stagnant in your understanding of reading fluency and the Common Core state standards? Well, as somebody who really had never spent any time looking at the Common Core state standards, I can say that my understanding has dramatically improved. I mean, they literally verbatim, it says it in the Common Core state standards, it is all dependent on reading and language metalinguistic skills. So they are deeply, deeply integrated. Fluency in developing reading fluency, it just, as the grade levels progress and as the criteria gets progressively more complex, that's when fluency comes into play. Students need to really be articulating their reading fluency and improving reading fluency to kind of keep up with the standards that are listed for them. Do you believe that the Common Core state standards are essential to your practice as a teacher? For question number 3, to answer that, I would say yes, absolutely. Just like the Family and Consumer Sciences National Standards and the 21st Century Skills are essential to my practice, now I kind of have an idea of what I can expect of my students. And it's a connection that I never really drew before I took this course. This was almost like an epiphany that I had a couple weeks ago. Like, oh, okay, that's why this is important. Is because now I know if I'm asking too much of my students, or maybe I need to differentiate for my 7th and 8th graders versus my 9th graders that I'm teaching at the junior high level. So now I know what to look for, how to kind of ramp it up for those kiddos that, need to be meeting higher benchmarks and criteria. And as somebody who teaches in Washington State, absolutely they are essential, because it's what our state adheres to. So might as well hop on board. Question number 4, do you feel confident in your ability to implement what you have learned in Education 544 within your classroom? I'm never 100% confident in anything that I do. I wish I was. But I will say that with practice and time dedicated to implementing time for reading, giving my students a chance to actually develop content area literacy skills rather than just learning, what culinary arts is, I feel that this is something that I definitely am going to be working towards improving on. And I feel like I can use it for my TPEP too, as a part of the Danielson framework. Kind of use, here's how I'm, really looking beyond culinary and how am I trying to help my kids be successful. 2 goals as a teacher: to help children improve their reading fluency and comprehension skills. Okay, 2 goals that I have. I would say the first goal for myself that I have is to actually have like dedicated time for my students to read in my classroom. Never done that, since I started teaching, but give my students maybe, let's think culinary, maybe 15 minutes a day or something like that for a week. Just kind of see what it does for their comprehension as far as like reading recipes and, finding, their ability to maybe actually follow a recipe. Because I've noticed that in my classrooms, that I teach in, a lot of my students are really intimidated by the idea of reading a recipe. They would rather just ask me, hey, what am I supposed to do? And I'm like, dude, it's right there, read your recipe. And they don't really like to do that. So, spending time and actually getting my students reading. So maybe just set aside time, every single day for a week just to start, and then maybe after that I don't have to do it every week. But while I'm definitely in that unit of recipe reading and understanding, which should be every single day. I mean, that's what I'm trying to get at. Sometimes I kind of look at myself, I'm like, what a goofball. How have you never done that yet? But I mean, that's why I'm here, right? Try to be a better teacher. Another goal that I would have is to try to get every single kid in my classroom up to that benchmark that is listed in the Common Core state standards. So get them there, help them out, because if their English teachers and their language arts teachers are the only ones that are, leading them to those standards, they're never going to get there. So take time to actually look at the benchmarks and get my students there to the best of my ability. A piece of advice that I would give to another teacher about reading fluency and comprehension: as it pertains to learning and improving and students' learning and development, I would say start small. Don't really try to bite off more than you can chew. Please just like realize that if you're like me and everything has looked, it's been very, very intimidating. I would say that you just start small. Please don't overdo it. Okay. I apologize. So I will close there.